Welcome to Content with Character, the weekly podcast that'll give you the momentum you need to create content with more ease, clarity, and laughter. I'm your host, content copywriter Emily Aborn, and I'm all about unconventional marketing approaches. I believe in your big ideas, and I'm excited to help you share them in a way that's distinctly you. Would you believe that this is the toughest part of me creating these episodes? You see, every Content with Character episode has a structure to it. The sample, an intro, the content, a little summary, and a preview of next week. Oh, and the outro. In this episode, I'm going to talk about why we might want to structure in our content in the first place, and 4 ways to consider structuring yours depending on what you're sharing. Hello, my friend, and welcome back to the Content with Character podcast. If you're a regular listener and you heard me share last week how I felt like I was really far behind with my content after having been wildly ahead, you'll be happy to know that I'm now somewhere in the middle. I'm not too far ahead and I'm not too far behind. It's like Goldilocks, right? I have found my bliss in all of Baby Bear's possessions. It's just right. You may also be relieved to know that this week is going to be a bit less rambly than last week's episode. I don't know. Some of you maybe like that. And if so, please tell me. We'll continue rambling away. But for the most part, here on the Content with Character episode, I like to kind of have a structure to my content. I like to respect your time, respect why you're here, which is to learn about content creation, marketing, and visibility. And I also like to stay on track, which is exactly what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about structure and staying on track. I know, it was a brilliant segue. I actually planned it, so it wasn't that brilliant. But still, when it works, it works. So in today's episode, I'm going to talk about 4 different potential ways to structure your content. And I'll actually apply it to different formats of content that you might share. Now, the goal of this is twofold. First of all, when we structure things, when we have a structure to things, it helps those of us who need a framework or maybe like the bones of something, and then you can kind of like fill it in from there and be off to the races. So it gives you like an outline per se. Maybe you just need some guardrails. And then once you have those guardrails in place, you can sort of dance to the edges and shine. The second goal, the second objective, I guess, when we're structuring something is for our audience sake, whether we're speaking to listeners or we're writing for readers or we are, it's actual members of an audience that we're speaking to. It's helpful for them to stay on track and engaged and not distracted when they're interacting with what we're sharing. Now, if you want more on the topic of decreasing distractions in your content after this episode, make sure to check out the show notes because I did include a past episode of Content with Character specifically on distractions called Avoiding Distractions in Your Content. You might find that helpful too, kind of goes along with this. And because this episode is going to be like a little bit more of the pragmatic nature, if you will, I also included detailed show notes so that you can see these structures actually like bullet pointed out. You can find a link to those in the regular show notes, and this will all be kind of like in that blog format. So real quick, before we get into the ideas and the how-tos, I want to share the review of the week, which comes from Amanda May C. on Apple Podcasts. Amanda says, "I just love everything about this show. The tone, the material, just everything." And I want to give a big thank you to you, Amanda, because I really appreciate when any of my listeners take time out of their busy day to tell me what I'm doing right here on the Content with Character podcast. I super appreciate it. So if you also feel so inclined, I welcome your positive and loving words in the form of an Apple Podcast or Spotify review as well. Content with Character, I'm excited to toot my own horn here, or our own horn, I should say, because we're really doing this together. It is ranked as a top 10% globally listened to podcast. And I really want to get that percentage a little bit lower, meaning I would like to get to like a 3% or a 5%. So I need your help spreading the love, spreading the word about the podcast, and let's maybe even eliminate a whole 0 after that number 1 in that percentage, okay? Real quick about me, just in case this is your first time listening or in case you need a refresher, I'm Emily Aborn. And in addition to hosting this podcast, as well as my She Built This podcast, I'm a copywriter and I primarily write for local small businesses, also those in the home trades industry, think like painters, interior designers, stagers, builders, realtors, that kind of thing. So if you want to connect and check out my website, wherever you like to connect, I'm pretty much there. The links are all in the show notes, or you can just type in emilyaborn.com into your internet browser and I will pop up. As of my latest Google search, I am the one and only me, which is always nice. Okay, a little behind the scenes here and kind of like the micro learning of this podcast episode. I want to point out like how I sort of sit down to structure these episodes, these content with character episodes. I pretty much use the same structure, and you may have come to hear this, but I use pretty much the same structure each time. So every week you get a little sample of what's in the episode. That's before the music even ends. Then you get like that introduction portion where I lay out where we're going. I do introduce myself and do any housekeeping if there is any housekeeping to be done. I also then dive into the actual episode content. Then at the end, I give you like a little tiny short summary and maybe even a preview of what's coming next week. Then the outro music obviously reminds you again to write me a review and how to connect and all that jazz. So it's very plain and simple. It's just 5 parts that I need to sit down and think about when I plan these episodes pretty much every single time. Now, of course, there are exceptions, but what I find that this does is to help me stay on track because I can veer off wildly. And I don't think that that is the best way for me to deliver this stuff and make it applicable and practical for you. I just know myself, and that's not the best way that I deliver information. So it does help me to have like a little bit of a structure. It also helps you kind of know what to expect as we go. And by previewing, which I love previewing, or giving glimpses of what's to come, it also helps like know whether or not like, oh, maybe what is coming next is going to be something I want to perk up my ears to and pay a little bit closer attention. So I think that previewing works great in a lot of formats just to kind of give people like this, like, hey, you're going to want to lean in for this part. I think it's also important to know that there is no right way or wrong way to create content. There's really only the way that works best for you. And that is a constant journey of learning, experimenting, failing, trying again, trying something new. You get the idea. So with that all said, these structures are great. And they're also just ideas for you to try or to apply to something that maybe you're already trying. It kind of reminds me of the 5-paragraph essay structure in school. Like, I really liked that because it gives you a springboard to talk about whatever you have to talk about in the assignment. And I always just found it like way less overwhelming because instead of taking this huge idea and just being like, all right, run with it, I had an idea. I was able to condense it, simplify it, and like really work it out in an order, right? And it allowed us when, I'm just thinking back to that essay structure in school, it allowed us to go deeper rather than wider on various topics. So that's kind of the goal of this. And the 4 structures I'm going to get into today, they are, don't worry, you don't need to take notes. Like I said, there's extended show notes on this, and we're going to get into these and then they'll make a lot more sense. So the 4 structures are problem, solution, benefit, compare and contrast, situation, need, action, result, and point, evidence, example, point. Ooh, you're going to love that. You also will find a lot more examples, different ideas out there, and plenty of ways to say these exact same things, but this is where I landed for the purposes of just like keeping it really simple today. So as I go, I'll show you how to apply to various types of content, and I'll give you a couple examples. Your brain is going to be different than my brain, and it's going to be different than the next person's brain, so you might really be drawn to one versus another. Let's get into it. Let's start with problem, solution, benefit. This is perhaps like one of the more prevalent marketing structures out there, you could also call this pain, solution, transformation. So let me just say it again. Problem, solution, benefit. Basically, you bring up an issue, pain point, challenge, then you offer the solution, and you end it all with how it will benefit them or transform their life in some way. You could also give several examples of issues, several examples of solutions, or the actual steps that they might need to take could be the solution itself. And you could give several ideas of benefits. So if I were doing it for this episode's structure, I would kind of lay out the problem. The problem is that you feel all over the place when you're sharing content, or you can't get your thoughts in order, or you have too many ideas and you try to pack them all into one post. You don't even know where to start. And then I would map out for you the solution. Well, the solution is these structures, or the solution is step 1, step 2, step 3. And then I might bring that home with how it benefits you and also your audience. So it's really, really a simple structure. Problem, solution, benefit. And you really do see it a lot in marketing. Now, the pros of this structure are that it's like really easy. And because it's pretty common, a lot of people are familiar with the cadence that you're setting out, whether it be on your website, in a social post, in a podcast. People are familiar with this, so they have come to expect it. And commercials, if you watch any commercial, many commercials, I should say, not any, but they're a great example of this. They do it all the time. Like, are you a person living your life with XYZ pain, right? Here's the problem. Okay, here's the solution for that. And then benefits are you too can look like this happy, shiny person romping in the wildflowers with their kids. So you see it a lot in commercials. Another pro in favor of this structure is that it really is effective and it really does work, especially when it comes to conversions and helping people see like just how real their problem is and nudging them to take action. Now, I'm also going to share with you a con of this style. A con is that it's super easy, which means a lot of people do it. And so in that regard, I think it's harder to stand out with this kind of content structure. The other con is that you're simply sort of starting off by bringing them down, making them feel like they're at a deficit. And while it obviously does work because people will do almost anything to avoid pain, you and only you can really decide like how you feel about doing that, you know? Sometimes I see it being used a little bit shystily. Is that a word? It's a new word. I see it being used a little bit shysty where, you know, they kind of make you feel like maybe you have a problem or amplify a pain that maybe you don't. So you got to be careful how you use it. Here are some ideas for making it effective. Like if you want all the pros of this content structure and you want to avoid as many of the cons as possible, here's how to kind of go about doing that. You can present those problems and that pain a little bit more factually, right? So like a little less emotionally. Sort of like, I see this a lot in my line of work. Or, you know, this is totally normal, but it's also still a problem. Or so many people I talk to experience this kind of pain. And then I might use that as the opportunity to step in, empathize with them, show them that you see, hear, understand, and also end with a message that empowers them because now you're giving them the solution, right? And you're going to share those benefits. So you really could use this in a way that gives them hope, inspires them to take action, transform, and choose a different path for themselves. You're the guide on the journey, but it's more of like that, like, take my hand and let's do this together. I also think, you know, if you are going to use this structure, really place a lot more of the emphasis on the solution and the transformation and the benefits rather than diving deep into the pain and the problem. They're already well aware of the problem, most likely, and they don't need you to like leave them with gaping wounds. They want you to give them hope and relief from the problem. So I actually just had to, I just did this with a massage therapist website, and I'll tell you what, it was a little bit of a tough dance because the people going to see this particular massage therapist, they have really deep problems. And in some cases, they're chronic. It's very problematic pain. It's complex issues, and they need solutions. Now, doctors have told them that they can't help, and they kind of get shaking heads from everybody that they've gone to see for help and support. So we did have to paint that picture for folks and say, like, we know this is dark and it feels like you're in the pit of despair. Like, we had to paint that picture for them pretty quick, but we didn't want to leave them there. We didn't want to leave them in the pit. So then we have to bring in those solutions that this specific massage studio offers. And then, like, what are really the benefits? What does it look like when you live that life now free of pain? So it was a really great example of this exact structure. Conversely, last fall, I was in a workshop about imposter syndrome, and the woman spent, and I'm not even kidding about this, it was like 45 minutes of her hour-long workshop talking about the pains and woes and problems of imposter syndrome, how it holds you back, how it makes you feel, where hers came from, how she felt about her own life. And then at the last 15 minutes, she offered a very paltry solutions, like very bad solutions. And I don't even really think I personally walked away with like a single, like, oh, here's an action step. And then it was just like one sort of like last quick hurrah, no benefits, right? But just one last quick hurrah as we wrapped up along the lines of like, think how great you're going to feel when blah, 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 blah. So it was pretty bad. I think she attempted to use this structure and like missed out on the solutions and benefits portion. So if you're using this content structure, when applying it for yourself, balance the three out. Spend time on those solutions and benefits. Don't dwell on the pain for longer than you need to. Lastly, I would also recommend you know where folks kind of are in the problem, symptom, solution journey. And I know I'm like throwing a lot of words at you. So if you're listening to this and you're like, I have no idea what you're talking about. I recently did an episode on pain, problem, solution awareness. I'll be sure to include that in the show notes as a resource as well, because it would help you to know where they're at in their journey, what their level of awareness is before you kind of try to even tackle those problems. So that's problem, solution, benefit. Let's move on to compare and contrast. And then after we compare and contrast, we give an opinion or a solution. Do you remember compare and contrast in school? I used to love those. I used to love finding those hidden patterns, the differences, and also the similarities in concepts. So just like it sounds, this is where you set up 2 or 3 ideas, and then you're going to make a comparison. You're going to share similarities and differences, give them a conclusion, but the conclusion could also be your opinion, or it could also be the solution. Now, in this episode, as a lifetime example, I'm implementing a little bit of this. As we go through each one, I'm giving you pros and cons. I may even refer back to a past type and say, it's like this, but it's not like this. So here's the difference though. In this episode, at the end, I'm not giving you an opinion. I'm not going to give you a conclusion or a solution. And I'll talk more about that later, but I like to leave you, in the lurch or to make decisions for yourself. If I were trying to share with you, let's say, using ChatGPT for your content creation versus using Google's version, which is Gemini, for your content creation, that is the perfect type of sort of content for this structure. My friend Alicia Galati recently did an episode of her Successful Podcasting Unlocked, where she walked you through whether or not your podcast should have seasons. And it was the perfect content for this format. She compared, she contrasted, she gave similarities, differences, reasons you might choose one way versus the other. And, just to be honest and frank, I can't remember if Alicia gave her opinion at the end or not, but knowing Alicia, it would make total sense if she did. So let's get into the pros and cons. Pros of this structure, it can be really fun, actually. Like, it actually gives you a lot of ideas when you sit down to create in this way, and it gives you a way to show different sides of the coin for people to consider. If there's one thing you should know about me, it is that I love all the sides of the coin. I also think that it gives them kind of like this is a good fit for you and gives them that ability to start self-identifying which option they prefer or think is best as they go. Now, by having that solution or that opinion at the end, then you sort of get that opportunity to step in and say, do you agree? Where do you stand on this? So it does open up quite a dialogue, I would say, with your reader, listener, audience member. And it kind of reminds me of like a court trial where there are jurors who, after hearing both sides, they heard all the ins and outs and angles, then they have to come up with the answer to who done it, right? Guilty or innocent. So it's it really does give you a lot of things to consider when you're creating content. Like, I really actually love it. Cons. I think that it's much easier to apply the less things that you're talking about, the less things that you're sharing about. So with this podcast, even with 4 things, it's a little harder to do it in this exact format than it would be with like maybe 2 options, because you can see quickly how it might get overwhelming or confusing. And I also think that there are certain things where, like giving this podcast as an example, I don't like to give you my opinion. I don't like to give you a solution because there is no blanket solution. But obviously, I think that in some instances, it can be absolutely perfect. So I think you have to think about what you're talking about, because it definitely applies better to some forms of content than others. I have also not personally tried this with short form content. I've done this in a workshop before. I did it on podcasting. So it was like, should I start a podcast? And it laid out sort of like comparing and contrasting podcasting it was podcast versus blog. And it was laying out the difference, like, should you do a podcast or should you do a blog? Like, what's the best use of your time? I don't know how it would fare in short form. Could it be done effectively? Probably. I'm not sure. Perhaps you can try and report back. This idea just kind of popped into my head about two travel options, like dreaming of a tropical getaway. Let's compare 2 stunning destinations, like Bali and the Maldives, okay? And then you kind of talk about either or, and then you could offer your opinion or the solution, right? So both destinations offer great experiences, but personally give us Bali, let's say, any day. You could do it with, like, if you're somebody that shares 2 different ways to go about laying out a website, you could do the same thing. So that's it for compare, contrast, solution. Let's get into the last 2. Situation, need, action, result is up next. And like I said, don't worry about remembering all of these words. Just think about the structure. That's really the important part, the high level piece. And if you want the exact words, like I said, check out those extended show notes. So situation, need, action, result. With this structure, you basically describe an event that either has happened or something that they face. And then you discuss what needs to take place from here. What actions will you take, or do they need to take, to solve the problem? And then you share the result. Now, listen up, home trades folks. This is so great for you. So I'm going to start there. And then we'll apply it other places. My husband often does this with his paint company. I was looking through his content. He posts on Instagram sometimes. And I noticed that he does this pretty consistently in his content. So he'll say something like, when we stepped into this house, there was chipping paint, holes in the wall, outdated trim. The area is high traffic, so they needed a product that would stand up to dogs, kids, muddy shoes, wear and tear, etc. So then he shares how he took an action, or how the specific paint that he chose was for that reason. He shares exactly why he made the choice that he did, or the steps involved. Often he'll share the steps involved to getting the end result. So, and then he shares the result. Now they have a space they can live, work, play, and they don't have to worry about damaging the walls, or their walls will last, 10 more years with this kind of wear and tear. So it can be a really great thing for like somebody in the home. I'm just using that as an example. I'm sure you can kind of put your own business in there. It's a really great example actually for like somebody like a copywriter, right? Like, here's the problem, here's the steps I took to remediate the problem, and here's the result. Pros. It is a great way to show the before and after, the transformation, but also how you, the expert, specifically listened to them, right? You took time to understand, and you dove into the cause of the problem. You found the unique solution for them. And then voila, that is how you got the result that you did. It's a really good structure for case studies, testimonials, sharing your work, giving examples of how you work, how you tailor your approach to different people, hone in on their needs, what makes you different, sets you apart, like all of that. It is so good for that. It is also very specific. And I think by being so specific, it helps you to really hone in on your niche or your niche, however you like to say it. People can see themselves in the initial situation, and they can identify very closely with that example that you gave. So I think it's really, really powerful in that way because it does make people feel very seen and heard. Like this is when people are like, oh my God, it's like you're in my brain, right? That person is going through exactly what I'm going through. Cons. I think, after thinking about this, I think it might be harder to do in longer form content. Unless you just were giving example after example, case study after case study, or somehow it's just a really long drawn out story. But I think that practically speaking, it's probably a little more challenging in long form. This may be, if you want to do this, it might be helpful to have the person who experienced the transformation coming on to share. I've heard podcasts and I've listened to presentations that are one big case study, and I kind of find them boring. If I don't relate to the example, it's okay, next. That specificity is kind of like a double-edged sword, right? So it can be really effective to speak to that specific type of person, but you can see how, a listening ear or a watching eye, it might just glaze over when they realize, this has nothing to do with me. I also think another con is that it tends to be, and you can, think about this for yourself, because it's a pro and a con in my opinion, but it tends to be more self-promotional or kind of okay, now you need me. I'm the clear answer here. And I'm definitely open on that because I think that that's a pro and a con because there's times that we want to be sharing promotionally. So I would just say don't lean on this one as your one and only structure in your content. But overall, I like it. And I think it gives people a really clear way to identify themselves. It paints you as the one that they can trust to find that solution. And it's easy to apply and put into practice. It's super easy to apply. Last one. Are you having fun? I am having fun. You can probably tell I'm having fun. This excites me for some reason. Okay, last one. Point, reason, example. Very straightforward, very much what it sounds like. You make a point, you give a reason, and then you give an example. So in podcasting, I'm a big fan of this one. It's so easy to do with a podcast. And you may or may not have noticed, I've been doing this through the entire episode. I give you a point, and then my reason is in that pro and con, right? And then I try to offer you with some examples. So with this one, it's also important to, I think, wrap up by returning to the initial point. We want to say, you know what? I covered everything I told you I was going to cover. Here's the summary of that. And bonus points if you gave them a little preview at the beginning. So let's get into the pros. Pros, it's very easy. It's very clear. It's trackable for a lot of brains. And I like that it kind of gives people different people different things. So what do I mean by that? One person might be sold when you give them that preview. They're like, oh my God, yes, I'm already in. Or they already have their mind made up, maybe. One person heard your first point and your reason, and that was all they needed. They're like, you've got me. And then for the more skeptical, you've kind of got some examples, you've got some more reasons, you've got some facts, some data. But you also are appealing to the heart and soul people, like the empathizers. You've got, tangible examples. They can see it in action. And then because maybe people have gotten lost along the way or distracted or forgotten what you were saying, you can cleanly sum it up at the end where they get that chance to make up their mind all over again one way or the other. So I'm a big fan. I really love this structure. I think it's easy to provide concepts and ideas. So I'm thinking podcasts, workshops, blogs, and even to some extent when I am working with somebody one-to-one, I use this structure a lot, like in a strategy session or something. I will give them a we'll lay out the point, we'll give a reason, we'll give some examples, and it just makes a really good like teaching style even, I would say. So it's sort of 3 ways to tell people a thing. And it's I really do love it. And you can easily adapt it or make it your own. You can do this with visual, audio, video. You can bring people in with questions. So great. Those are all my pros. I know I gave you a lot of pros. Less cons, but still cons. Cons, I think that this may be harder to do with short form content. Just practically speaking, it's a lot to like pack into a post or a reel. I've seen it done. I'm not saying it can't be done, but I know for me, I require leg room. And so this is often where you see, like in short form, this is where you might see someone say like post 1 out of 4 or comment 1 out of 4, 2 out of 4, 3 out of 4, etc., etc. So that's a con that I see, is it's harder to apply for short form content. Another con is that it doesn't always let you add in a bunch of layers of nuance. Meaning you could start to become very long-winded if you start adding in all the what ifs or all of the alternatives, or this also could be the case, right? So it doesn't give you a ton of space unless you have a very long amount of time to present the information. It doesn't give you a ton of space to be able to deal with complex or maybe like multifaceted topics. But overall, you obviously heard me share way more pros than cons. I like it. So to summarize, here are the 4 different ways we talked about to structure your content. Number 1, problem, solution, benefit. Number 2, compare and contrast, and then offer them your opinion or the solution. Number 3, situation, need, the action you took, and the result. And then number 4, the one we just covered, point, reason, example, point. There are obviously, like I said at the beginning, more. There are many, many more. But I was like, you know what? 4 is a perfect number. These are 4 you can apply and try. Now, are you ready for my opinion on which one I think is best after we kind of went through this comparing and contrasting? I know. I don't usually give you my opinion, but I'm going to. Here it goes. No, I'm just kidding. I think they're all a great way to go, depending on what you're sharing. And I think that furthermore, you got to find what feels best to you. It's really fun to try them all out in various formats of your content and with different applications. And I think that sometimes, as you heard in this podcast, there's room to merge several together. So in this episode, you heard me mostly use variations of that compare, contrast, opinion, though I didn't give you an opinion. You also heard me use that point, reason, example, point. When I'm sharing about a website I did copy for, like I said, I use that situation, need, action, result. When I'm writing website copy for clients, I'm almost always going to tend towards that problem, solution, benefit. So there's totally different reasons that we would do different structures. And it just helps, I think, give us a little, like I said, like some guardrails for where we're going. So now you have it. All you have to do is give them a whirl, see what works for you. And like I said a million times, if you want those detailed show notes where this is all written out for you, you can just visit the regular show notes and there's always a link to the extended one. Just look for the pointy finger emoji and follow the pointy finger emoji. And if you are wondering, like, Emily, where do stories and storytelling fit into all of this structure? Where's the art to this science? Well, you read my mind because we're getting there. We're going to do that the week after next. But next week, we're going to talk about copycatting because I have a recent horror story to tell you about copycatting, and I'm going to help save you from making the mistake of copycatting somebody else, which is a huge problem I see, but also lessening your chances of being copycatted. So I can't wait to chat with you then. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Content with Character. If you loved the episode, please make sure to subscribe to the podcast, rate, review, and share it with someone else you know it could help. For more content and visibility tips, visit my blog at emilyaborn.com and be sure to connect with me on Instagram at emilyaborn. I'd love to hear how this inspired you to take action.